Recently, I started to think about male lonely epidemic and why so many women doesn't want to go into relationship anymore, or why so many people in the relationship seems to completely exhausted. And I feel like I keep hearing the same topics from people again and again. I think one of the biggest struggle, frustration actually comes from you've tried to communicate something over and over again, but somehow it never changed. So I found it really interesting and I started to pull on this thread. And somehow it turns into this really deep rabbit hole. And this is the video I want to talk about why people struggle to change and what trauma actually does to us. And really important thing is why even if you see someone and why even if you understand someone, it doesn't mean you have to stay. So I wanted to start from my own family dynamic because I recently returned home and I start to notice that my mom is complaining the same thing about my dad for years, and it got me started to ask myself that is like, does my dad just simply doesn't see the problem, or is it because he just doesn't care, or is it because like change actually requires something from him that he simply is not willing or not yet able to change? So I start to ask myself, why is it difficult for my dad to see that his same behavior has been creating the same problem for years? Because if I had a wife, I would want to make her life easier. I would want to be a supportive partner. I would want to notice before she gets exhausted. If I love someone and then they keep telling me something's bothering them, I would want to do something about it, you know? And so I started to ask why someone refuses to change even if they're been told repeatedly. And I think it comes to awareness. And I'm talking about two kind of awareness here. The first one is relationship awareness, and then the second one is self-awareness. Relationship awareness means, can you see the other person's reality? Can you see what they are carrying? Can you see how your behavior is affecting their life? Can you see what is the invisible thing they've been doing, but you just cannot see it because it got very normal to you? And the classic example here is, I'm sure you saw this on Instagram Reels. There's a wife. She has been taking care of the kids, taking care of the husband, taking care of the whole house, the whole day with no help. And in the evening, her husband is like, why do you give me attitude? Jesus Christ, she has every right to feel disappointed and upset. But oftentimes the husband doesn't have a clue what is going on, and a lot of men seems to ask, where is the divorce come from? They only see my wife is angry today, and that's where the story ends. They don't see 3 months of accumulated frustration, 3 years of resentment, 30 years of having to carry everything by yourself. They only see the moment, but they don't see the long-term pattern. They see one argument about the dishes, but they don't see hundreds of times their partner noticed about the dishes, thought about the dishes, asked for help with the dishes, and eventually having to do the dishes themselves. And that's why they ask, why are you making such a big deal out of this? But we are not reacting to this one moment we are reacting to years of having to notice everything alone. And I think this is where a lot of the relationships start to fall apart, not because there's no love, but because there's only one person who has been carrying an entire reality while the other person just seemed to not notice. And if your partner's like that, I think he or she is lacking the awareness of the other person's reality. Up until this point, we've been talking about people who don't notice, people who don't see the pattern, or people who is just pretending and using weaponizing incompetence to avoid responsibilities or accountability simply because they're still a man-child. That is a totally different case. But I think there's another situation we need to talk about, and this is where I'm going to focus on in this video, because not every relationship looks like that. What if your partner genuinely loves you, genuinely wants the relationship to work, but somehow you guys still have the same arguments even if you tried really hard to communicate? And in that case, I think what is lacking is different kind of awareness. It's no longer about whether you can see your partner, it's about whether you can see yourself. Because self-awareness means you can notice something is happening inside you while it's happening. Can you notice when you start becoming defensive? Can you notice that you are actually reacting from an old wound instead of responding to what is happening in front of you? Can you notice that your mind immediately creates stories before you believe it? Because if you can't, then I think it's almost impossible to change. And I feel this one in my bones because in my past relationships, a lot of the time my ex-girlfriend asked me to adjust something. I often got triggered and we start to fight. You know, whenever she asked me, can you be more considerate? What I heard is completely different sentence. What I heard is, I don't like who you are. You're not lovable for who you are. And that fucking hurts. So naturally, I start to defend myself. And that is what my trauma filter is speaking. And when I start to dig deeper, I realized that I was not just protecting myself. I was actually protecting a wound that learned a long time ago. Criticism means rejection, and being corrected means being rejected. And it doesn't make sense at all. But the craziest thing about trauma filter is trauma does not only remember your past, it actually translates your present. Realizing this becomes one of my biggest shifts in my life. Because in the past, if I feel under attack, then you must be attacking me. But now, if I feel I'm being attacked, maybe you're not attacking me. And there's a space in between. The space is where the trauma is translating the situation. And realizing this, once I saw this, it completely changed everything. Because a lot of the times we become defensive is because we are protecting our wounded self. A wounded self that is terrified of being rejected, terrified of being not lovable, terrified of being wrong. By the way, this is exactly the process I love exploring with people on my one-on-one coaching session. We start from something small and we slowly uncover the operating system that is underneath everything. Because once you change that, your whole life completely changed. And if you feel cold, like to have a space to explore your own pattern, finding a way back to yourself, I leave my website in the description box. You can check it out. Okay, back to the video. So now we understood that, but how did I eventually change? The truth is, it didn't happen overnight. It took me years of study psychology, years of healing, meditating, and self-reflecting, and still got triggered, fighting, and apologizing. But you know what is the point? The point is I didn't give up. I keep fucking trying and trying and trying. Until one day, a magic moment just happened. I remember that day I was in the kitchen cooking my breakfast, and something just hit me. I was like, why am I holding on to this version of myself so tightly? Why am I so afraid of changing? And that moment is like I was watering the seed, and that seed is actually growing its roots this whole time underneath the soil. And in that day, it finally sprouts. And that's exactly why I think just understanding is not enough, because a lot of people will think, okay, if I understood the patterns, I see the patterns, then I will naturally change. I think that is not the truth, because I understood so much long before I actually changed. You know, a person can say they're healed and can explain to you every theory perfectly. But once you are in a relationship, immediately you got triggered and reacting in the same old way. Then you're just talking because you really need to put yourself into the battlefield to test what you've learned. You don't think your way into a new life. You live your life into a new way of thinking. But I'm not saying you have to do it perfectly on the first try, because there's a lot of times I thought I healed my trust issue, but something come up and I just realized that, okay, there's actually still a deeper layer of trust, or a different kind of trust that I need to work on. And that's why people say healing is not linear. It's actually a spiral progression. And by constantly reminding myself of that actually helps me to have a lot more compassion for people who are still trying, and a lot more compassion for myself, because I really understand how it feels like to genuinely want to change but still not able to change, you know? And that is so important, to have compassion for yourself, compassion for your partner, and compassion for other people around you. But there's one thing you should always keep in mind. Compassion does not mean staying. Understanding does not mean tolerating. Empathy does not mean abandoning yourself. You can understand someone and still doesn't want that dynamic in your life. You can have compassion for someone and still walk away. You can understanding someone why they become who they are and still saying my answer is no. That is not cruelty. That is just healthy boundary. So what makes a relationship worth staying? Because nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. No one's perfect. So the answer is not, are we perfect? The question is, are we willing to grow together? Are we willing to see ourselves, communicate, adjust, and repair? Because if there's only one person who is growing, only one person who is carrying the relationship, then that's not a relationship. That's just carrying that weight. At the end of the day, you have every right to walk away. Today. Not someday. Not when it gets bad enough. Not when you find a perfect reason to leave. Right now, even if they're trying, even if they have potential, even if they love you, even if they genuinely want to change, you still have your free will. You are allowed to ask yourself, is this making my life better today? Is this where I want to be today? Is this has costing me too much to stay today? And that is your free will. Compassion does not mean you should give up your choice. You can choose peace right now. You can choose yourself right now. And that is your free will, because your life is not in a waiting room, and nobody gets to guilt you for that. You're not obligated to stay just because they may become better one day. You can love someone, see their effort, respect their journey, and still say, this is not the life I want to live. And that is your free will. And it deserves to be respected 1,000%. Remember this. Compassion means understanding why someone become who they are. Boundary means deciding whether that version of them belongs to your life. And most people are not responding to what is actually happening. They are responding to what their trauma think is happening. And that's why I think building awareness is so important, because once you can see, I'm not actually reacting to my partner, I'm actually reacting to an wounded self, then you can finally stop living the life your past choose for you. Instead, you can live the life that's actually yours. And I think that's why remember who we are is really important. And this is the space between us. I share what I learned in my daily life, and let's grow together. I will see you on the next one. Bye bye.